Virginia Woolf was an absolute trailblazing modernist author who reinvented how English literature looked today. But a lot of people are afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I get it, she's not the easiest author to get into, but she's so worth it. So, what I'm going to do in this video today is hand you some insights into who this extraordinary person was and how to approach reading her books. At the end of the video, I'll even give you a sort of order in which to read her books if you really want to get into Virginia Woolf. Now, without further ado, let's get reacquainted with Virginia Woolf and no longer be afraid of her. Born in the year 1882, Virginia Woolf emerged onto the stage of history as the Victorian era was drawing to a close. A world where societal norms, gender roles, artistic conventions, and even the very essence of how literature was crafted, held steadfast, was about to collapse as the tempest of the First World War swept away these certainties. Despite being born into a privileged family, Virginia Woolf swiftly came to understand that her path as a woman would diverge sharply from that of her male counterparts. A relentless pursuer of knowledge, she, in her own words, stole her education from her father's library. Strikingly, her debut into the literary world faced formidable barriers, as no publisher dared to embrace this audacious female voice. Undeterred by rejection, alongside her husband, she forged her own path, birthing a publishing house from the cozy corners of their living room. Beneath the surface of brilliance, however, Virginia Woolf bore the shadows of inner turmoil. From a tender age on, the weight of depression cast its long shadow over her. Yet, from this darkness emerged a profound fascination with the human mind. Mirroring the zeitgeist of her time, her pen delved deep into the realm of the psyche. As Freud and other trailblazers pushed the boundaries of understanding, Woolf too joined the chorus, her work encapsulating the spirit of a new era as she embraced new literary styles such as stream of consciousness. Now, why are these topics important? Because these are the topics you will meet in her work. Gender, gender fluidity, feminism, the human mind, consciousness, how time works and changes. All of these are staple Virginia Woolf trademarks. Now, if you do like this type of content, let me know down below in the comments and do give us a like, because that tells me to make more of these kind of videos. Now, where do you start reading Virginia Woolf? Personally, if you're new to her work, I would start with a non-fictional work. A Room of One's Own is in fact a summary of notes she made for one of her TED Talks. Virginia Woolf frequently did public speaking venues to talk about her ideas on how women should be actually given a room for themselves. A place where they can express themselves freely, where they can create art or write poetry. Virginia Woolf truly believed that the only difference between male creators and female creators were the chances that they were given. Give them a space of their own, give them a stable income, and they too will start creating. Because it's not one of her fiction works, A Room of One's Own is very accessible. It is easy to read, it's not stream of consciousness, and it gives you a really good insight in who Virginia Woolf was as a person. Virginia Woolf was an excellent public speaker, and she apparently knew perfectly how to translate her TED Talk into this little essay, which is still very lyrical and almost poetical to read. So if you're not entirely sure in where to start with her works, why not start here? Now, as we dive into her fictional work, I would start with Orlando. Orlando is one of her only books that is more or less plot-driven. It is a story about a young nobleman, Orlando, who seemingly lives forever. And as time goes on, he adapts himself, he reinvents himself, and he even switches gender mid-book. And trust me, it does make sense in the story. Now, because it is more or less plot-driven, it is much better structured than some of her other books and much easier to follow. Orlando is an excellent example of how Virginia Woolf plays with the progress of time and how she reinvents her narrator, her main character, throughout that flow of time. It also illustrates very well how she struggles with the construct of gender and how it shackled her in her lifetime. It was a bit of a scandalous book that no publisher dared to touch, and I absolutely recommend it. So if you want to dive into her fictional work, start with Orlando. And then we have to talk about Mrs. Dalloway. Now, Mrs. Dalloway is probably Virginia Woolf's most famous book, although, at least according to me, it's not her best. It's still very good, but there's more to come. Mrs. Dalloway was a bit of a tipping point for Virginia Woolf. This is the first novel where she embraces that stream of consciousness she has been very interested in. And from here on, it becomes one of her absolute telltale trademarks. It is a story about two main characters. You have Mrs. Dalloway, Clarissa Dalloway, and Septimus Smith. Now, Clarissa is a young woman who recently got married, and she's walking through the streets of London thinking about all the preparations she has to do for a party later on that day. It is a story of a single day, but much more seems to happen because time in her mind, in her consciousness, is a lot longer than 24 hours. Septimus Smith is an old war veteran who suffers from really bad post-traumatic stress disorder. The doctors said he's beyond their help, and he as well walks the street of London apparently at the same time. Now, while these characters seem to be very different from each other, they are in fact two sides of the same coin. Both of them are past their prime. Society doesn't find themselves very useful anymore and has discarded them somewhere in a corner. It is a story about perception, about how we perceive the world around us and how the world around us perceives us. How quick we are to make assumptions in our mind and how others make assumptions about who we are. Mrs. Dalloway for me is the novel where Virginia Woolf finds her voice as an author and where she embraces that stream of consciousness and absolutely makes it her own. It is less structured than Orlando and less plot driven, but it is so worth it. Mrs. Dalloway is a literary walk through the streets of London and through the mind of these characters. And in fact Virginia Woolf herself. So if you've read Orlando, then absolutely go for Mrs. Dalloway. Next one up is To the Lighthouse. And To the Lighthouse is possibly my favorite book of Virginia Woolf. But now we dive deep into the stream of consciousness. It is the story about the Ramsay family who own a little cottage by the sea on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, where they often go for the summer. Just as in Mrs. Dalloway, we experience the world around them through the eyes and minds of the characters. But here it gets much more experimental and fun. Even the house itself becomes a character and we get to see and hear what it thinks and perceives around it. We are no longer constricted by a single time frame like we had the one day in Mrs. Dalloway, but time gets more superfluous. Memories and thoughts and the past and the present all seem to flow into each other and mix. Time gets a bit wibbly-wobbly in this one, to quote another time traveler. One of the main takeaways from this book is that life cannot be measured in hours and minutes and days. It is past and present, memories and thoughts all at once. And this is why one moment seems to be over in a heartbeat, while others seem to last for a lifetime. If you read some of her other work and you're now ready for a bit of a Virginia Woolf challenge, then To the Lighthouse is an absolute go-to. It is one of my all-time favorite books and I highly recommend it. But we're not done yet. The Waves is my last and probably most experimental, most difficult book that I want to pitch to you today. At the surface, you could say it is 6 monologues. 6 friends who tell about their own lives, all neatly next to each other. 6 monologues, each with their own tone of voice, characters with their own little quirks. Nothing special there. But throughout the book, 6 become one, and the voices start to almost harmonize, linked together by a love for the sea, for the water, and the sound and rhythm of the waves. There is no plot to this book. It is all about rhythm, flow, and it is almost to be read like poetry. Virginia Woolf herself called it a play poem, an experimental marriage of poetry on one side and a stage monologue, it's a play on the other. This book is like nothing you've read before, and in fact it challenges us to think about what literature, what books actually are. It is a true masterpiece and an absolute milestone in modern classics. It has a melancholy to it, and it has inspired piano pieces and movies and photography. To say it with a very contemporary term, this book is a vibe, and it should be read like that. So, if you're ready to totally let go and flow onto that stream of consciousness that is Virginia Woolf, then The Waves is for you. And now, as always, I want to hear from you. Have you read any books by Virginia Woolf? Are you Virginia Woolf curious? Or perhaps you are an all-time Virginia Woolf fan? Let me know down below in the comments and we'll talk Virginia Woolf some more. As always, thank you for watching, hit the like button, do subscribe. And if you're not really ready for stream of consciousness, modernist classics, then you can always go here instead.